Welcome to Rainy Day Recess, where we study and discuss Seattle Public Schools. I'm Christy Robertson.
And I'm Jasmine Polito. And today's episode is called Picking the Headhunter. We're talking about the April 9th school board meeting, where the board reviewed proposals from executive search firms and started the process of choosing who will help them hire the next superintendent.
Before we get into the proposals themselves, let's back up and place this meeting in the timeline, because this is just one piece of a much bigger process. Superintendent Jones announced he was leaving on March 13th.
And his last day will be September 3rd, the first day of school.
That means they need to hire a new superintendent, which was last done in 2021 when he was hired after Denise Junot left.
Right, hired after being an interim, and they tried to search for someone to be permanent and ended up hiring Superintendent Jones.
From my recollection, they just offered him the job. I don't think they interviewed anyone else.
Oh, they didn't do a search at all.
But I remember it being controversial because he had worked for the district before, and Chandra Hampson had flagged him as potentially great superintendent material and said, look, let's just hire him as an interim superintendent without doing any engagement, and then we'll do engagement for the real search, and he won't apply for that real search. And then when the time came around, they just hired him.
Hello, this is Jasmine jumping into the script with a fact check. So I did look up on the SPS website the previous superintendent search, and on February 28th, 2022, they posted that they had hired HYA, and HYA is Hazard Young, Adia and Associates, to do a search for a superintendent. They did a couple of community engagement sessions. And then there's an update on March 4th. Ooh. So that post that they had hired HYA was February 28th. And then 4 days later, they announced that they were going to pause the national search and instead negotiate contract with Dr. Jones.
Here's Board Director Vivian Song on March 4th of 2022. This quote made possible by the awesome website SPS by the Numbers, created by parent Albert Wong.
Public schools have a level of intimacy with the public that simply does not exist in other forms of government. And it's because families are trusting with us their most precious possessions. We do not have or require that kind of trust of other levels of our government, not our city, county, state, or federal branches. I spoke with an educator and a parent last night, and in her words, maybe it's not the right person, but the public did not get the chance to know it. The Seattle Public Library just announced on Wednesday that their interim chief librarian, Tom Fay, is their final candidate. Their board hosted public forums for its two finalists in February. Videos for each candidate are posted on a website. We have given the public more of a view into who we trust for the care of our books and for our kids. Even the time accessibility of this meeting, I take issue. We are meeting when parents are dropping kids off at school, when teachers and classroom staff is working. They are not able to listen to our deliberation. On the dais, we directors are often asking our district staff what kind of community engagement was done for the board action requested. I don't believe we directors are holding ourselves to the same standard we hold our district staff to. And for all of this, I want to say that I am deeply sorry, deeply sorry. And yet, where we are now, and the decision today is not about the process, but rather about entering contract negotiations with Dr. Brent Jones. And I just want to share that I have spent 30 hours interviewing stakeholders as part of my independent preparation for our superintendent search, separate from the work that Hazard Young and Atea was contracted to do. And much appreciation to the Mayor of Seattle, Bruce Harrell, County and City Council members, State Representative Sharon Tomiko Santos, who is the chair of the House Education Committee, Dr. Sean Pan, Chancellor of the Seattle Community Colleges, 5 previous school board directors, community-based organizations that work in direct partnership with our district, and critically, central office staff, principals, educators, and parents who are generous with their time, feedback, and their want for our districts, our students' success. And one theme has emerged for me: consistency. Building leaders, staff, and parents spoke to me about how challenging this pandemic has been for themselves and for our students. This school year, despite the intense challenges and unpredictability of the COVID-19 virus, under the leadership of Dr. Jones, we have managed to keep our kids in classrooms. In particular, they and I were impressed with his leadership during the Omicron wave, standing up public health services for tens of thousands of people in just a few days, taking quick and decisive action to keep as many students in classrooms and the virus as much as possible out of our classrooms, to give our students the consistency and stability they need to do the learning that we want them to do. And engaging central office staff at all levels, the consistency and alignment of what our vision is for our district, our students, which is a relentless focus on student academic outcomes. This consistency is a direct consequence of the leadership that Dr. Jones has already brought. We're not quite there on a building by building basis, but I'm really confident that under Dr. Jones' leadership, we will get there. And talking to the people who have worked directly alongside with him, managed him, or for him, a remarkable consistency in their feedback about his character, his deep commitment to community service, his ability to listen, his ability to collaborate. People like working with him, for him. And this is really important because a unique challenger is to have 7 individuals as your boss. Yes, we should govern as a body, but we are still 7 individuals with 7 different lived personal and professional experiences that by design we are bringing to the dais. And we do not have a good record, plainly, for constructive relationships between previous superintendents and previous boards. I think this board has work to do, but I already think that Dr. Jones has demonstrated his ability to work constructively with this board. And so for these reasons, with my gratitude to Dr. Jones and his family and recognition of what a huge job this is to be a superintendent, to be a leader for a district with 50,000 students, their willingness to give us 2 more years, I will be voting in full support of giving President Hersey authority to negotiate a contract. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Director Sommeritz. We appreciate your perspective. That was wonderful.
Okay, back to 2025.
All right, so the RFP timeline, the requests for proposals for a firm that would lead the superintendent search were issued on March 26th, and then those proposals were due on April 8th. We're recording on Friday, April 11th, so that was earlier this week. And then April 9th, there was a special school board meeting to evaluate those proposals to decide which firms they would interview.
Which means directors had all of a day to do their scoring. And President Topp had them come in with the RFPs being read and scored by the directors before they got there.
And then how did they find these proposals?
There must be like some dissemination system where firms know when RFPs are put out, and they had to rush because they had less than 2 weeks, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I'm surprised they got 5 proposals, but I'm glad they did.
I
It was such
know.
a tight timeline. The board action report outlined why it would be better to search for a firm instead of doing it in-house. One was that it's too big and complex for the board and or the staff to manage by themselves. It also offers structured community engagement and candidate vetting. And then lastly, board policies and WASDA, which is the Washington State School Directors Association guidance, recommend doing so.
Yeah, pretty much it's really for the structure. And they talked about this at the previous meeting. If you read the RFPs, it sounds like they go out and find the superintendents for you, but those who have the experience seem to know that's not actually the case. You find superintendents through your networks, and these firms manage the practicalities of it. So that was really helpful to me as I was looking through the RFPs to know what I'm looking for is what structure do we want to see provided for this.
And did anything stand out to you when you looked through them?
The thing that struck me as the biggest differences had to do around community engagement. And maybe that's partially because that's what I'm interested in.
Right.
That's what I think our listeners may be interested in is drastic differences really in how community engagement works for the different firms.
So should we go over the proposals and scoring?
Yeah, let's talk about the proposals. And actually, I forgot that they had gotten 8 proposals. in that short amount of time.
Oh.
But only 5 of the RFPs met their minimum requirements. So the board directors only had to score 5.
Do you know what the minimum requirements were?
Oh, yeah. I remember them talking about it last time. It had something to do with like that they had been around at least a few years, that they had done at least a few searches, that they had some experience with big cities, stuff like that.
Oh, okay. That seems reasonable. So the 5 firms they did end up reviewing were McPherson and Jacobson, HYA, which is Hazard Young Atia, sorry if I said that wrong, and Associates. Also Ray and Associates, JG Consulting, and the Hawkins Company.
I have absolutely no familiarity with any of those. It turns out that HYA, Hazard Young, Atea, and Associates is the search firm that they started to use to look for a permanent superintendent while Superintendent Jones was the interim, and then decided to just hire Superintendent Jones. So they very briefly worked with HYA at that point, 3 years ago. Back to 2025.
So once the proposals came in, the board scored them, and that's what they came to the meeting with. So this April 9th meeting was to go over those scores, see if they want to change them based on the conversation that they had in public together, and to talk about next steps if they were good with moving forward with interviews with the top 3 firms.
Yeah, or they were allowed to just pick one firm at this meeting.
Oh, they were. I didn't know that.
So that was part of the discussion they had at the end.
One of the things I did notice that they mentioned at the meeting is that hiring a search firm, they stated would be $100K or less. So I appreciated them giving the dollar amount of how much it would cost to now run this process in the middle of everything else that's happening. And I just wanted to also mention that Hersey, at the very beginning of this meeting, did mention that he had a relationship or association with someone in one of these firms. He was basically saying that he just wanted to be transparent. Someone he knows is in those firms, and that's not going to affect the way he scores.
I have a professional colleague that is a consultant at HYA. His name is Micah Ali. For those of you who were on the board before, Micah presented the board through CAPC, an organization that he's affiliated with, an award a few years ago. As you'll see in my responses, I want to be super clear, it did not reflect in my evaluation whatsoever, but just out of an abundance of caution, I wanted to make sure that I disclose that I do have a colleague that is a part of the organization that is applying, and he was not a part of that organization when we received the award, to my knowledge. So just wanted to keep everything as above board as possible.
So they put up a big spreadsheet of all the directors' scores for each firm, and they were scored on their approach and methodology, their track record, community engagement, their familiarity with SPS and the timeline. And then each director filled out a pro and con sheet for each firm. And then the staff compiled the data.
Yeah, and this is actually a pretty straightforward meeting. So they turned in the score sheets, and then they went to break so staff can total, and then they came back from break, and they're like, here are the totals. And this is not including pricing. The way that they do the scoring, pricing is 20% of the score. So that part was not included yet. And so the initial results, I'll just name the top 3. HYA at 72.29 points. Ray and Associates at 66.71. McPherson and Jacobson at 65.43 points. So not that big of a margin as far as scoring goes.
No, although HYA did seem to be an outlier, like comparatively. Most of them fell in the same range. And apparently this is how they do all RFPs, is that first they do all the scoring on qualities that they're looking for, and they discuss that and they finalize it, and then they add in the pricing, and they're like not allowed to change it after that. That's why they had this big discussion about, are we sure we're fine with these scores? Because when pricing comes in, something that we really like might get knocked out if it doesn't have a high enough score here.
Yeah, so they did finagle a little bit their scores, like, oh, I'm willing to put 5 more points on this person, just to give them a little bit of a buffer.
And I'd be willing to bump up mine based on this conversation. They scored 77 out of 80. And I'd be willing to say, okay, add 3 points.
So I could bump them up. I'll give them 5 more points in the engaging community and system stakeholders category. So I'll give them a 15.
And also, one thing worth mentioning here is that Director Rankin was not at this meeting. And so whatever comments or influence Director Rankin might have contributed to that conversation were not there.
Scores were there, though.
Yeah, her scores were there, but she couldn't change.
She had scores from all the directors, but she couldn't change anything. And also, it was quite a short meeting.
Yeah, so anything else we want to say about pricing?
Let's see. They took a break to add the pricing scores in. And when they came back, pretty much the top 3 stayed the top 3. So no surprises. Nothing got knocked out.
But HYA was in the top definitively initially. And then afterwards, I think McPherson and Jacobson was top.
I'm going to ask contracting specialist Craig Barber to read the results.
Okay. The results for RFP 032503 superintendent search after the price analysis is ranked 1 McPherson Jacobson at 84.311 points. HYA was ranked 2nd with 83.277 points. Ray and Associates was ranked 3rd with 83.217 points. JG Consulting was ranked 4th with 81.077 points. And Hawkins was ranked 5th with 79.984 points.
Yeah, so I think HYA was the most expensive, and so it got bumped to 2nd, even though it was quite a bit on top at the beginning. As I said, what I'm most paying attention to here is the community engagement part. I have really only seen one hiring process in SPS, and that was Superintendent Jones's. I was curious about how it worked in other districts, so I watched some finalist interviews in other districts. And they did go through a process with Jones, I think, where they put out what do you want to see in a superintendent? And Jazz, it kind of reminded me of the well-resourced schools community engagement, where it's when you're thinking really abstractly like that, you're going to always end up with the same, I want a superintendent who's organized and a good boss and engages well with the community, just generic stuff. I feel like it's going to be really important to actually have community meet the finalists, because comparing people is different than comparing your ideas of what you want from a superintendent. Kind of like those abstract, well-resourced schools conversations versus what about actually closing a specific school.
Are you saying something like a presidential debate, but between superintendent candidates, something like that?
Yeah, not a debate necessarily, but what I've seen done in other districts is a single finalist will come and meet with community and answer a few questions, just so they can get to know that finalist a little bit. And then a few days later, maybe another finalist will come. And then community might fill out scoring of their own.
Interesting. We used to watch a lot of cooking competition shows, and they'd have this competition where the community has a meal by some chef and they get 50% of the voting. And then of course there's still the panel of experts and they have 50% vote, but the community gets a pretty big buy-in into what happens.
I think it would be very helpful if the superintendent jibes well with our diverse communities.
So you want someone who's charismatic?
I think charisma can be a helpful feature in a superintendent. It's like a CEO position, right? It's a relationship. You're actually not doing that much of the practical work of the district. You are a figurehead in some degree, and it can be helpful if people like you.
You're a big relationship builder, for sure.
Yeah.
I do think it's an important quality in order to make sure community is brought along with communication. They could be charismatic and not communicate to the community, but being a person who communicates often and is charismatic in building those relationships within the community, yeah, I agree with you there.
Yeah, and I'm not trying to say in contrast to Superintendent Jones at all, but I think There's also a degree to which it's a sales position, tying into what you're saying, that you are trying to run initiatives, and those initiatives need to be sold to the community and the many communities that comprise our district: teachers, principals, union, legislators. You might be doing the exact same initiatives, but if they can be presented in a way that people can get on board, that makes things go a lot better. And some of that is just personality and can't be conveyed by predefining what do I want to see in a superintendent, and then having the board take that rubric and have the board rate the superintendent on that. So going into the specific proposals, I was surprised that many of them did not have a ton of information about community engagement, and many of them didn't really have a finalist stage engagement involved, including McPherson, which is the one that is now the top when you factor in price. There's no finalist stage engagement built into that proposal. It says, we could do that if you want, but their structure doesn't just have that built in. Whereas HYA has a whole rating system, a QR coded finalist feedback thing for community that I feel like would be very welcomed by Seattle.
Yeah, but if we ask the community, do you want to pay extra for this though?
I have already heard from a couple of people that are the most expensive one is the one that everyone preferred. But to me, is this the place to skimp? This is going to be the leader of our whole district. HYA did have the highest price, $120,000.
So it's over $100K.
It is over $100K. Maybe they're going to negotiate price. A couple of the directors, their biggest concern was the timeline of HYA. So they were like, can we negotiate about the timeline?
Right.
And the answer was, you have to judge these RFPs as they are. And if you do interviews, you can ask about that.
Right. You have to negotiate in interviews.
Mm-hmm. But an extra $20K for hopefully a superintendent that's going to be around at least 3 or 4 years and is going to be in charge of a multi-billion-dollar budget, that might not be the place to skimp.
As far as return on investment for a $20K, yeah, I think that would be there, assuming that they can deliver a superintendent and that's going to stick around for a while. I also see here that the Hawkins Company, who came in 5th, actually led Seattle's last superintendent search.
Oh, okay.
And they're the lowest cost.
Yep.
HYA also said that they vet candidates for closing opportunity gaps, which I thought was really interesting.
And I believe the top 2 both had some kind of a guarantee. If something happens within the first year, they'll help you find another one at just cost.
Wow. That's quite a guarantee.
I think HYA was a number of the directors' top choice. They also seemed fine with McPherson. And there wasn't a lot of discussion about the community engagement aspect, so I hope they think about that a little bit more. But one thing I was very happy about was they had the opportunity to just pick one. They could have just said, well, McPherson's on top after price, so let's just pick McPherson. Or they could interview the top 3 search firms. And it was unanimous that everybody wanted to do interviews. So I think that's good that they're taking the time to do that extra vetting.
I also thought it was good that they were really keeping an eye on student outcomes and how much the firms that were applying were focusing on student success. I also think it's great that we do have some district staff that are going to be part of this.
Yes, Buttleman introduced 3 staff people. I was kind of surprised it was that many. But then he got the name wrong of one of them, and he said that a couple of them were new. That doesn't mean they don't have experience, but the team itself appears to be quickly put together.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's true. I actually forgot about that part.
Maybe we can play that.
Yeah.
I'll just briefly introduce the staff who are here with me. All 3 are relatively new to the district, so this is a learning moment for all of us and for you, having never done this before with the superintendent hiring process. So As President Top said, I'm Kurt Buttelman, Assistant Superintendent for Finance, and it's my pleasure to introduce Nick Iona, who's our procurement manager. I think the board met him at a meeting a week or two ago when this process began. To Nick's left is Greg Brady. Greg Barber, he's been with the district since July of last year and has done a lot of work in tough circumstances. He's been the lone contracting services person for a long time until he was joined by Mila Eldridge, who joined us also in January. So we brought all three of these professionals today just to have some continuity throughout the process in case one or some of us can't be here throughout the entire process.
And as we said before, 2 board directors were here for the last search, Brandon Hersey and Liza Rankin, and the rest of them, as far as I know, have not participated in something like this. Okay, let's talk about what's next.
The board has now narrowed it down to 3 firms, and so they're going to schedule interviews for April 18th for McPherson and Jacobson, HYA, and Ray and Associates. Each interview is going to be about 45 minutes. And the board members are going to submit questions ahead of time. So that deadline is April 14th, which is falling conveniently on spring break.
That's right.
So thanks to our board directors for working on spring break.
The deadline for the questions is Monday, and then their interviews are Friday. So they have to show up for a 3-hour meeting on Friday of spring break.
And then there's a 2-part decision day that's going to be April 23rd. What day is that?
It's the regular school board meeting day, Wednesday.
So they're going to be making a decision in less than 2 weeks. They're going to finalize scoring and select a firm in the afternoon of April 23rd. And then that evening at the regular board meeting, they're going to vote to amend the board action report with the chosen firm.
Kudos to President Top, who has just dialed this in.
Wrangling it in, for sure.
And to all the board directors, as you said, and staff who will be there working over spring break to get this done so that we can have from April until sometime mid to late summer to find a superintendent.
Yeah, and I'm hoping this time that they'll do more community engagement.
100%. Let us know what you think is important in the superintendent search. What do you think about the money issue? Have you seen other superintendent searches, and what were they like?
Email us at hello@rainydayrecess.org.
Enjoy your spring break, and we'll see you at the other side of that, having rested ourselves, hopefully.
Yes.
You can find our show notes at our website, rainydayrecess.org, where you can also subscribe so you don't miss future episodes.
We are a listener-supported podcast. You can donate to us on our Patreon, Rainy Day Recess.
Special thanks to Lester Mayo and Mandana Movement for our music. I'm Jasmine Polito.
I'm Christy Robertson.
Stay curious, stay cozy, and join us next time for Rainy Day Recess.